At 72, Margaret had already learned that life was full of ups and downs. She had raised 3 children almost entirely on her own after losing her husband early in life. She kept a garden in her backyard, wore a warm smile, and carried a heart full of memories, but nothing could have prepared her for that autumn. Type 2. Diabetes came like a storm, silent, relentless. By the time the diagnosis arrived, it was already too late. Her blood sugar was soaring, often over 320. Her blood pressure, like an out-of-control elevator. The pain was constant, the energy, gone. Margaret no longer recognized herself. Her body felt heavy, her mind exhausted, her spirit dim. Her mood swung more than ever before. Simple tasks became overwhelming challenges. Climbing stairs, a nightmare. Getting a good night's sleep, nearly impossible. Everything got worse on a cold April night. A sudden dizziness. Then blackness. She woke up in a hospital bed. The doctor didn't sugarcoat it. "You had a severe hyperglycemic episode. It was close." Her children rushed to her side. There were promises of change, new diets, exercise plans, more medications, but nothing seemed to work. Her blood sugar refused to come down. Margaret felt like she was fighting an invisible enemy and losing. Insulin became part of her daily life. Needles, schedules, strict routines. Margaret hated needles, but what she hated more was the feeling of being a prisoner to her own illness. Then one quiet morning, she looked in the mirror. What stared back at her was a tired face, dull eyes, a woman who seemed to have given up. Where did she go? The strong woman who faced so much, where is she? And she cried, silently, not from physical pain, but from loss. Grieving the version of herself she felt slipping away, grieving the life she felt she was no longer living. That's when life decided to surprise her, because sometimes hope arrives in disguise. A simple gesture, a single word, a phone call. The phone rang. It was Mrs. Teresina, an old neighbor who had moved away a few years earlier. They talked for almost an hour. Teresina could hear the fatigue, the unspoken anguish in Margaret's voice. Then she said, "Margaret, I went through the same thing. I thought there was no way out. But something changed my life. A natural supplement. I discovered it by chance, watching a video. You need to see it." Margaret frowned. She'd heard too many promises before. But that night, driven by curiosity and a touch of desperation, she watched. The video told the story of a woman just like her, same symptoms, same struggles. Yet she had managed to turn things around, thanks to a natural supplement. No magic tricks, no miracles, just science, studies, real experts. Margaret couldn't stop thinking about the first signs of change. She found herself checking her glucose monitor several times a day, almost expecting the numbers to spike again, like they always did. But day after day, her levels stayed surprisingly lower. It puzzled her and moved her deeply. After so much time living under constant tension, it felt like she could finally breathe again. One afternoon, sitting on the porch with her notebook, Margaret began to track everything. She wrote down the times she took the supplement, the food she ate, her glucose levels, even her mood. It wasn't just a way to monitor progress, it was a way to reconnect with herself. Soon, she noticed more changes. She was sleeping better, waking up without that familiar heaviness in her body and soul. The joint pain that had made it nearly impossible to put on her own shoes, it was easing. It wasn't magic, it was progress. Slow, steady, and real. Her doctor was the first to react during her next visit. "Your numbers look better, Margaret." "Keep it up," he said, eyebrows raised in surprise. She smiled quietly, but inside, she wanted to cry. With gratitude. Her children noticed too. "Mom, you look different, happier, like your old self." And she was. Margaret started walking in her garden again. She planted lettuce, parsley, even cherry tomatoes. She fell in love again with the little things, the smell of wet soil, the warmth of the morning sun on her face, her sugar-free coffee, now tasting like victory. And each passing day, the fear was replaced with confidence, not just in the supplement, but in herself. Margaret felt something awaken in her, and she didn't want to keep it to herself. She began sharing her experience with friends at the senior group at church, not as a sales pitch, but as a story, a real one. She talked about what she'd been through, what had helped her, and how she felt now. One friend, Clarice, asked, "But what if it stops working?" Margaret replied gently, "What if it keeps working? I'd rather bet on hope than live in fear." She knew the road ahead wouldn't be perfect. That age and health still brought their share of challenges. But now she had an ally, and more importantly, she had found herself again. That's when she made a decision. She went back to something she'd always loved, writing letters. She began writing messages to others battling the same fight, sharing her story as a mother, a widow, a woman who had fallen hard but chose to rise. Every word was like a hug. Every letter, a hand reaching out. Margaret had discovered something powerful. At 72, it's still possible to start over. A diagnosis doesn't have to be the end. And sometimes, what changes your life isn't what you do, but what you choose to believe is possible. In the end, that bottle of natural capsules was just the beginning. The real miracle was the woman she found again in the mirror. The most curious part was that, beyond the physical improvements, Margaret began to notice something deeper happening. She felt more clear-headed. The forgetfulness that used to frustrate her had eased. The irritation that once flared up during moments of pain and fatigue now gave way to a surprising sense of calm. She started calling her grandchildren more often, texting old friends, and even thinking about going back to the church community meetings. One afternoon, her youngest daughter, Claire, stopped by for a visit. As soon as she walked in, she noticed something different. "Mom, you look different. Your face has color again. What kind of miracle is this?" Margaret smiled, her eyes welling up with tears. "Maybe it is a miracle, or maybe it's what that video promised, and I just decided to believe." Claire, like her mother had been at first, was skeptical. But Margaret showed her the test results, the notes in her journal, and even the supplement bottle. "Look, honey, I'm not saying this is some magic cure, but I haven't felt this alive in years." Claire took the bottle in her hands, turned it around, and read the ingredients. She was surprised by what she saw: cinnamon, berberine, alpha-lipoic acid, banaba leaf extract, all natural, but backed by real science. It was a formula designed to help increase insulin sensitivity, regulate blood sugar levels, and support cellular energy. Claire looked at her mother again, really looked, and realized this wasn't just about numbers on a chart. It was about life returning to someone who had been fading. And in that moment, Claire no longer needed convincing. She could see the truth in Margaret's eyes, in her voice, in her laugh. Margaret wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. "And you found this in a video?" Claire asked, still surprised. "Yes, and not just that. There were real experts explaining everything, doctors, nutritionists. even people telling their own stories. Stories just like mine. It felt like they were talking directly to me. Claire sat in silence for a moment. Then she gently took her mother's hand. "Send me the link. I want to watch it too." That night, Margaret felt a kind of relief she hadn't known in years. For the first time, she wasn't just fighting diabetes. She was winning, and even more than that, she was inspiring her family. She realized this journey wasn't only about blood sugar levels. It was about reclaiming her independence, about feeling like herself again. The natural supplement was just the spark. But everything that came after, that was the result of something even more powerful. The courage to try, the courage to believe, the courage to act. As the weeks went by, Margaret's results kept improving. Her doctor, Dr. Jennings, was following everything closely. He was a careful professional, someone who didn't usually trust natural remedies without strong evidence. But Margaret's lab results spoke for themselves. "Margaret, your A1C dropped from 9.4 to 6.7 in less than 2 months," he said, flipping through the pages with a look of disbelief. "That's incredible," she smiled, calm and confident. "I've been doing my part, and this supplement has been a powerful ally." The doctor asked to see the bottle. He read the label carefully, made a few notes, and then nodded slowly. "Well, this isn't a replacement for traditional treatment, but as a compliment, it seems to be working really well in your case. Let's keep monitoring it closely. But keep doing what you're doing." Margaret left the clinic feeling victorious. For the first time in a long while, she hadn't left with a lecture. She left with praise, and to her, that sounded like music. The courage to believe. The courage to act. That same week, she decided to share her story with a small support group for seniors living with diabetes. She sat in a quiet room, surrounded by other men and women, most of them tired, their eyes downcast, worn out from fighting the same relentless disease. Margaret spoke from the heart. She told them everything, from the terrifying night at the hospital to the moment she found that video about the natural supplement. She talked about being a skeptic who slowly became a believer, about the exhausted woman who rediscovered the will to live, and most importantly, she shared the link to the video, the one she had almost ignored, but that ended up changing her life. "I'm not here to sell anything," she said, her voice steady and clear. "And I'm not here to convince anyone. But if this helped me, maybe it can help someone else too." Some people wrote down the name of the supplement. Others just listened, quietly processing what they'd heard. But one woman, in particular, her name was Nancy, approached Margaret after the meeting. "Margaret," she said softly, "I feel like you just told my story. My blood sugar's been in the 300s too. I've tried everything. Do you really think this could help me?" "I can't promise anything, Nancy," Margaret replied gently, "but I can tell you, it's worth a try." They exchanged phone numbers, and later that day, Margaret sent her the link. In the weeks that followed, they stayed in touch, and little by little, Nancy began noticing changes too. Margaret's story was no longer a solitary journey. It was becoming a ripple effect, a chain of strong, mature women, fighters, survivors, tired of living in the shadow of an illness that had stolen so much from them. But now, finally, they saw a new path ahead. The supplement, simple as it seemed at first, was opening doors. Not just for better blood sugar, but for something far greater: hope. With each new message, each drop in glucose, each small victory, Margaret felt something deep inside her shift. She was living not just for herself anymore. She was living for every woman like her, who had almost given up, but still had a spark left. Sometimes all it takes is a little faith and the courage to click play. Today, Margaret looks out her kitchen window as she waters her little herb garden and smiles. The morning sun gently kisses the green leaves, and she feels a peace she hadn't known in years. It's not just about stable glucose levels. It's about feeling like she won. About saying yes to life when everything seemed lost. She remembers the night she almost didn't wake up. And she's grateful she answered that phone call. Grateful she watched the video all the way through. Grateful she clicked that link. Margaret isn't a doctor. She doesn't have a medical degree, but she has something many experts deeply respect. Life experience. She lived the fear, the weakness, the hopelessness of not seeing a way out. And she lived, too, the relief, the renewal, the victory that began with one small decision. To try something natural, backed by science and trusted by doctors who truly care. Today, Margaret is an inspiration. Her story is being shared in communities, support groups, and videos across the country. Not because she chased recognition, but because her transformation is too real to ignore. And if you've made it this far, maybe you're standing where she once stood. Tired, discouraged, worried about what's next. But just like Margaret, you still have a choice, one capsule, one click, one leap of faith. See what real doctors are saying. Discover the supplement that's changing lives, just like it changed Margaret's. The link is pinned in the comments. Months from now, you might look back and say, that was the moment everything changed. Because it's not too late. There is still hope. And this could be the turning point of your life.